Hello everybody, Dave Neal here, stand-up comic host of Bachelor Nation News, and this is our second video of the day regarding Chris Harrison's new podcast and his tell-all. In this second episode of his podcast, he released part 1 and part 2 this morning. Zima, his fiance, at the time I believe she was just his girlfriend, gives her details of everything that went down. She said, "You were told to stay quiet. You were burnt out. I was mad at you." She goes through the full range of emotions. I've got all the notes for you guys right here, and I'm going to take you through it with all of my commentary. We followed this story for 2 years now, and we're getting Chris Harrison and Zima's thoughts for the first time. Follow me on Instagram at DNeals, patreon.com/Dave Neal for live stream. I will be live this morning on Patreon to discuss everything, and wrapping it all up this afternoon, I will discuss it in further detail on the podcast Bachelor Rush Hour this afternoon. All right, so if you didn't catch the first video, go watch it, but here's my short form version, too long didn't read, of everything that went down. Chris Harrison's podcast, the most dramatic podcast ever, dropped this morning, and he has so much to say. Here are some of my thoughts. He said he was heartbroken and embarrassed, lost 20 pounds. He said apologies didn't matter, no playbook for cancel culture. He said he's very loyal to a fault. All right, so he basically talks about how he was being loyal to the show. Zima mentions the same thing when she says, that they were being told to stay quiet, and if anything, looking back on it, they should have spoken out. People in the comment section, as I have said for 2 years now, other people have said, Dave, you were right. He should have done what Rachel Kirkconnell did, which is grabbed his phone and made a long, heartfelt message. Let people, and what they say in this second video that I'm about to share with you, what they say is, by not talking, they let audiences fill in the gaps. And of course, when we fill in the gaps, it doesn't always get to the truth. It gets to what we think or project the truth may be. Let's have a listen. Part 2, the most dramatic podcast ever with Chris Harrison. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, because we have a part 3. I was going to include it in this video, but what he says about Nick Viall and other Bachelor contestants will blow your mind. I'm going to make a whole separate video about that. Let's listen to his chat with Zima.
That was the hardest part about it all for me. That was a very long answer.
All right, we're 2 minutes behind here. Sorry about that. Let's go to the 13-minute mark here.
Painful things I said in episode 1 was affecting you and how this affected you. And that was easily one of the toughest things for me to watch. What was the effect on you initially?
I think the hardest part was understanding it, because I didn't feel like I was watching you. I know that wasn't you in that interview. I know that it wasn't the way you felt. What was being perceived was not how you felt in your heart. And I knew that. And so I was also just mad, because I thought, how could you do this? How could you be so messy? How could you not see how you were sounding? But what I quickly realized is that everybody makes mistakes. And to me, including myself many times, obviously, and to me, the most important thing about a human is what their intention is and how they react after they make a mistake. And
of course, I agree. It's okay, honey, I know I said this, but what I meant to say was this. I'm sorry, I'm going to pledge to do better. Every conversation with a spouse goes this type of way, or should at least in a healthy way. No one's going to be perfect. How we act following that is important. By firing someone, we don't get to see the retribution. We don't get to see the reemergence. We don't get to see, and this is what gets important, we don't get to see Chris Harrison having conversations with his base, quote unquote, his base, his audience, the people that are just going to say, oh, cancel culture's the worst. You're just going to fire him. He did nothing wrong. No, clearly there was something that went wrong. Now, rather than just firing someone and paying them to be quiet, just like, people that are victims have to deal with these long-going and draining lawsuits. And then in the end, they'll just take a payout to drop a lawsuit because it's just easier and quicker. Well, Chris Harrison sort of did that. He took the payout, although we're not calling him a victim whatsoever. Okay, so maybe don't get that twisted. He took a payout, and because of that, we went 2 years without hearing him talk when he should have just talked right away about it all. Okay, so The next part is where Lauren Zima regrets not offering him better advice.
I don't think I could have done a better job because for me, you'd been famous for almost 20 years, 15 years at least when we first started dating. I worked at Entertainment Tonight. Some people knew me from my Bachelor recap show, Roses and Rosé, that I started. But I was not on the same level by any means. And I'd certainly never been through any type of scandal. So it was all very new to me. And it was a trial by fire of this unprecedented time in all of our lives, the stress of that. And this added. So I don't think I could have done a better job in advising you. I was just doing the best I could with the information I had at the time. But I do have regrets about some of the things that I suggested or the sounding board that I was at the time.
Because a lot of these thoughts, which she's about to get into, were to be quiet, to let it all blow over. And what they didn't realize is there was a group of people that weren't going to they wanted a statement. In the past, you just kind of made a mistake and you just like time would heal things. But in this case, no, time gave people a chance to contact advertisers, boycott the show, all these types of things, which is a good way for progressing change. That's always a good thing to, for activists, but it would have calmed a lot of people's maybe assumptions if he just spoke out.
Perspective throughout everything, but it wasn't easy to have people DMing you or me to die, to kill ourselves, to that we're horrible, to that was all really hard, and I was worried about that coming for your brother. But then to hear, you say that you felt like asking him to take that down fundamentally affected you and made you question yourself, is hard to hear. I look back on the statement that I put out at the time, and I wish I'd done it differently. There was a longer version of it where I said, I know who Chris is as a person, and I know that he, did not mean to come across that way. Or I can't remember exactly what I said, but there was a longer version where I defended you more. And I was advised, you talked a lot about being advised. I was advised, cut that out, like keep it shorter, just keep it short. You have to release a statement. So just get it out and like keep it short. Cause that's going to be better. It'll create less problems.
And I was a part of that conversation.
Yeah, but I wish I hadn't.
I know.
So it's very interesting, the idea that like people were advising them, maybe wrongfully, to just keep it short and tight, not realizing that people wanted information. I mean, my advice would have been the exact opposite. Go talk for 5 hours. Go talk on every single podcast that wants to hear you listen. Fight for your job, fight for your character. And if you feel like how you were acting in that conversation with Rachel Lindsay wasn't who you really are, then take that apology off the sheet of paper and take it into your voice so people can hear the tremor and people can hear the timbre of what you're trying to say.
You should be reading the comments and reading the coverage because you want to be aware of the situation. And also, the viewers of the show were so important to you and to me too, that we wanted to make sure we were trying to do right by people and to make things right. So we were trying to listen to everybody, but that also kind of messes with your head. And especially it's that thing of, and I think everybody who's on social media knows this, you can hear 10 nice things, but if one person tells you you're horrible or tells you to harm yourself, that hits you a lot harder.
All right, so she gets emotional, of course, obviously, having dealt with the hate that can exist out there.
Something to say, right? Because you have to. Because what is the use of an article that says, hey, I'm really excited about this. I'm curious to hear what he's going to say.
So basically they're saying that the truth wasn't going to get out there because no one was getting their quotes. And, again, that maybe they wanted, I guess to take time. 2 years is a long time. But, like you said before, he felt like, and again, this isn't me defending him. This is me trying to pick this apart. But he felt like people had already chosen sides. So might as well just take some time off and then talk when things have settled down.
Always take the time for every person who comes up to me because I owe all of my success to these people, and you care about the fans and the viewers so much. So, I in part say that to say that was what made all this so hard, as you talked about in the first episode, was how much you love everybody.
And you and I trying to figure out what was the best way to go about reaching those people. And that's what was so difficult. We didn't have this podcast. I wish, good or bad, I think there is this new model that I saw, and it's not whether you agree with them or not. It's just what I saw whether it was Joe Rogan or Dave Chappelle speak out when they were going through similar type things publicly. They had a platform. And I saw that and I was like, damn, I wish I could rewind 6 months. This is what I would have done. I would have sat down here with you and with you at home to have this conversation.
And Chris, you would have had that platform if you decided to make one. And obviously, this isn't one of those boomer instances, but he's a traditional media, and traditional media doesn't always understand you do have the power to share your thoughts and opinions. Now, from what I'm reading from a lot of different kind of people online that think that Chris Harrison has dropped the ball here, maybe, but it's his podcast. He's gonna have more time to elaborate. There may be areas, and this happens in any sort of fight. I with my wife, there'll be times where I'll think she might be upset about one thing, and it actually turns out she's upset about something else. And meanwhile, I'm laser focused on the one thing. He's had 2 years to think about this, but a lot of people are saying he is not really addressing what was said in his podcast, in his conversation with Rachel Lindsay. But I think what he's trying to get to is that he doesn't want to be defined, and Lauren Zima is saying she doesn't want him to be defined for who he was in that moment, but more a collection of who he has been. And I think anyone who's had to deal with maybe public, I think most people that have in some way or another been criticized publicly or have had the public sort of inspecting their every move, I think you'd understand there is more empathy there. Like me personally, I by no means are at any sort of level of Chris Harrison, but I've had people look into who I am, like the stand-up comedy I make and things I've said and done. And it is kind of like, oh, okay, you could paint a picture of me if you so choose. And seeing some of the comments people have left summarizing his 2 hours of conversation are saying, oh, he's comparing himself to the royal family. And well, sure, but not in a way that someone might think if they only read one sentence. It's so there will always be people that don't listen to his episodes, and people will listen and may still disagree. But it's it just goes to show our listening comprehension is not nearly what it used to be, because we have the ability to get shorter form content, read headlines only, that type of thing. So that's not to say that people aren't allowed to feel their opinions. I just always say, get to the source, in this case, Chris Harrison's podcast, listen to the full thing, and then your opinion's worth more than maybe reading a recap, including mine. Go listen to the full thing. All right, so let's get to the part where he's told to stay quiet. This is where it gets interesting.
And then they can kind of go away for a while and come back and do another movie later. But this was being brought up over and over and over again. And I was on a nightly news show and we were covering it every night. And it made me look at my own industry very differently too. I was very much on the other side of it. This has also all reminded me of how much gray area there is. Like as you've said, there are people at the show who you still love so much. There are people at the show who are very problematic still.
Whoa.
And for me, I look now at, I always, when I was covering the show, I'm not saying I didn't try to find the dirt, because I did. It's part of the whole machine. But I never wanted to, I mean, I always was running an article where I felt like it was well sourced. I had reported the truth. What I realized in seeing the coverage of this was that maybe, unfortunately, even when journalists might think they're reporting the truth, there are versions of the truth. It's not the whole truth. I remember I saw one source said that you were calling people begging for your job. And I know that never happened. And I think maybe people see, maybe their source is an assistant who's heard half of a phone call from another room. And so the version that we get of the truth of what journalism is supposed to be, the first draft of history, gets pretty whittled and watered down. So that was
in
a
this
learning
day and
moment.
age, that's all it takes, right? One article.
All right, so let's just skip forward. We have 2 more clips to play for you guys here.
One thing in looking at the interview and in seeing how you've been in the past year and a half since it's all been over is I've realized how frustrated you were at work. I still, and I can't really go back and watch that interview because it brings back so much. But I think one realization I've had is that people felt like, oh, is this a side of him I've just never seen? No. What that was it wasn't the truth of you. It was a very frustrated, burnt out, tired version of you.
And of course, this is hard for people to cope with. But because it sounds like you're apologizing for someone else or making excuses for, but we all exist on a range. We all exist on a range where our worst moments, maybe sleep deprived. I mean, we look at the villains on the show. We talk about it all the time. When the villains on the show or people say problematic things or something, the worst version of them may come out, hungry, tired, drunk, these types of things. It's not an excuse. It's just a range. And so often we think that we are, the hero of our own story and we do no wrong. So when we see this, we go, oh my gosh, this is horrible. When in fact, in most situations, when the lights are turned on, when anxiety rises and all these different situations, so many possible outcomes can happen.
And you are so rarely that. Chris never gets mad. He doesn't really get sad. You are the person who's always trying to be strong for everyone around you. Sometimes to the point of some of our conflict comes from me saying, but how do you, tell me your emotions. How do you feel? Are you upset? I mean, you won't even tell me if you're sick. You're like, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm like, are you? Because you haven't gotten out of bed. No, I'm good. I'm like, okay. But I think in that interview, you were, you'd been filming in quarantine. We'd had stretches of, I think 3 months where I didn't see you, where you didn't see the kids. And some of that had been used against you. I think it was purposely leaked that you left quarantine to move your son into college.
Wow.
And I know that hurt you, that it was kind of something that got weaponized against you and you were just trying to be a good dad. I know you were so worried that this controversy was happening about.
We almost forgot that part. Remember when he showed up late for work because he had to quarantine because his son went out to school in Texas?
Around Rachel Kirkconnell and you wanted her and Matt to not break up. You wanted Matt to be okay. You didn't want Matt to be going through all this.
So this is the first mention of Rachel Kirkconnell. Lauren Zima is basically saying that Chris Harrison was busy defending Matt James and Rachel Kirkconnell because in the moment he knew they were still together, and in the moment the audience did not know that. So he was trying to defend Matt James and Rachel Kirkconnell. Now, of course, people would say, well, in the process there was collateral damage, being that you were dismissive of Rachel Lindsay, and that which they don't address is why I believe, if Rachel wants to, he needs to go and hire a learning podcast and talk to Rachel Lindsay about that.
So all that frustration and exhaustion went into that interview. And I really saw that you were really tired of a lot.
So she says she saw that he was tired and broken down or whatever, And of course, some of my, we all have parents that say things. I remember my mom once, the only time my mom ever swore at me when I was like 6, right? She swore. And I saw her snap and it was like horrifying to see. I was like, my mom snapped, I was like, she was the cool, calm, collected one, but in the moment she was in a place of despair. And those are the moments where we need to, I think, give people the most amount of love.
His kid's soccer team.
Right.
There's a good headline. The beauty
Last clip
of my life is that this doesn't define me whatsoever. If it defines me to you, that's on you. That's not on me. And my life, and this is what helped me leave the franchise and leave the show, is because I've never defined myself by that. I was proud of it. It was something I did. It's something I spent a large part of my professional life building and doing, and that was awesome.
Now, I'm going to cut it off there. You can go watch the full thing. Here's where I kind of disagree. Like, I'm not buying this argument where it didn't define him. This was the culmination of his life's work. This was the biggest thing he ever did. Everything that he has professionally is because of this show. But I can understand the pride saying this doesn't define me. Sure, maybe it doesn't define you, but your legacy has now changed. And I think once he mourned the loss and took the NDA and the paycheck to leave, once that all happened, I think now finally 2 years later, he's like, all right, maybe I need to do some character rebuilding. I'd love to know what you guys think. You can leave a voicemail. I'll play it on today's Bachelor Rush Hour, 401-213-9828. The next video coming up is for subscribers only, so if you haven't already, double check and make sure you're subscribed to this channel. It's free. And then this afternoon, Bachelor Rush Hour, link in the comment section. I will be discussing this further. Patreon.com/Dave Neal for behind the scenes bonus content. We'll be right back.